comes to Venom The Last Dance, I'm going to be honest and say it was quite the watch. Firstly, I really enjoyed that this is definitely the darkest of the trilogy, not only from the violence itself that we get to see, definitely more grotesque and gruesome, but it's the tone itself. I really loved the relationship between Eddie and Venom, definitely feeling more closer than the previous films. Even though there's little issues here and there, you can definitely tell that these two care for one another. I really enjoyed the CGI that we get. It definitely is an upgrade. I felt like the antagonist of this film kind of creeped me out because of its scary nature, and then with the other symbiotes that we get to see, you can definitely see there's a different contrast of Venom, and the look and aesthetic was very different as well. It really was quite cool and distinguished with the other characters. When it comes to the humour of this film, I think they did a great job. Venom and Eddie were always funny from the first two films, and this is definitely the same. I would say it's very silly at times, but it's also very cartoonish, which I also enjoyed. But the main thing I loved about this film is that throughout, there's none of this jokes and unnecessary moments. They allow scenes to breathe and have that emotional maturity, even with characters such as Venom, which is quite surprising. The last thing that I really did love about this film is they allowed it to be a bit more foul with its language, and the fact that it's not quite the Deadpool layered, but it's definitely not very much Spider-Man. They definitely allow Venom to be a bit more foul-mouthed, which I really think worked for the film, as it definitely made it feel a bit more realistic, but at the same time it was funnier because you weren't expecting it to be so foul. Now when it comes to the ending of this film, I will be truly 100% honest, the third act was so good. I really enjoyed the fight scenes we get, seeing all types of symbiotes going against the creatures Null has sent to kill Venom. But the best part of the film was seeing Venom's sacrifice towards Eddie, making sure Eddie gets to live on. And as an audience member, they allowed us to feel a 1/10 of emotion that Eddie was feeling when he witnessed his best friend disappear. Now, I do have my issues with the credit scenes, as the first one, fair play, really enjoyed, but it's the second one that bothers me, because not only is it 10 minutes after the credits, which feels so long, but the post-credit scene itself just felt so unnecessary and unneeded and pointless. Wasn't even that funny. Now when it comes to criticisms, there's plenty to criticise. Firstly, it's the story itself, where we have a lot of stories going on all over the place. The main one that we as an audience are somewhat forced to focus on is Venom and Eddie trying to get to New York. That is the main basis of this film. But another story, which I personally think is more intriguing, emerges, seeing a creature sent by Null starts to attack Venom. Now that story should have been the major plot point after being seen and engaging Venom, but instead they carry on with the whole New York narrative and somewhat put that to the side. It's as if it was a thorn in the side rather than it being such a big thing, and then only really takes full control during the third act of the film, which again I loved, but I think it should have been the main focus on. I have my issues with how they displayed certain characters. For example, Null. I was really disappointed we didn't get to see him escaping the cage and taking on Venom, and he's just treated as somewhat of a teaser character, which I felt very odd, as this is the last film in the Sony Venom franchise, and for them to tease us with him is very odd, as if I'm being very bleak, I just don't see this character really coming back in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for quite some time, or just in the Sony universe. As, let's be honest, Venom's the only films that have been intriguing in this whole Sony universe, and to tease this character is so pointless. I felt as if this was a ploy by the studio to have the character so audience members turn up, but knowing full well audience members are going to be very much disappointed on how much screen time Null gets. I also think they did the character Teddy Payne very much dirty, as they give a little introduction to who that character is, but as a casual viewer I had no understanding how big of a character Teddy Payne is, not only in the Venom universe but in the Marvel universe as well, and I think they mentioned their names so subtly. They definitely did the backstory, but it's the mentioning of the character's name. I didn't know who this was until at the end of the film. And lastly, I think they did Stephen Graham's character dirty as well, as whilst he definitely got enough screen time and he introduced what was the most interesting part of the film, when it came to the action sequences, they did utilise him, but in a very minuscule way. His character gets killed off so quickly and it just felt like they built up so much, and then this end result just felt so little. I also have my issues with Venom as a character, as he is the one who tells us about the Codex and how, because Eddie Brock previously died and then Venom took over and basically fixed him, creating the Codex, Null needs to get that Codex off of him, and the only way they know the location is if they go into the full-on Venom suit. So Venom has to be incognito. He tells Eddie this, and there's occasions where they need to go full-on. It's understandable. But when they finally get into Vegas, we see that Venom breaks this rule and dances with Mrs. Chen, and it just felt so odd that he would be the person to break this rule and not Eddie. And even Eddie calls him out on how ridiculous this was for him to do. Now, when it comes to other characters, we get this UFO family that appear, which I'll admit they were a comedic treat and were also utilised in showing Eddie's softer side. But other than that, they were very unnecessary, especially towards the third act. I don't think they were necessarily needed to be there. All they were really were reacting figures to what is an amazing fight sequence. But that's it. Throughout the film, we see Eddie Brock is being watched on a monitor with CCTV and security footage as he is travelling across the country. But we also see a shadowy figure watching him, but they never explained who this is. I felt like this was an idea the writers came up with, and it was somewhat disregarded during the post-production, but they left some scenes in. Lastly, this is a very minute criticism, bear in mind, is I was very much disappointed we didn't get a Eminem song for this final film, as it would have been really cool to see a consistency with the film's soundtrack of each film having a new Eminem song, whether it being in the first one, the second one he's got a verse, and then in the third one it's maybe more of a collab rather than just a third. But yeah, I found that quite disappointing. They could have used a new Eminem song to promote this film a bit more, as they did with the first Venom film, as that song did a lot of attention for the Venom film, and regardless of opinion, was a memorable song. Overall, I think this was a great, or at least decent, way to wrap up the Venom franchise, and it was a very much entertaining watch, but at the same time it felt very muddled. I felt they threw so much at the wall and they started to scrape the majority of it off towards the end, really making it a bit bland. Now, is this film good? I'm going to be honest and say it's okay. Rating wise, it's a 6.5 out of 10. Now, when it comes to would I rewatch it, the answer is maybe, as like I've said, the third act of this film is top notch. It is amazing to watch, but it's the first two acts, which does have some hits and misses in my opinion, that lower the film, and it lowers my interest in rewatching this film. Now, when it comes to recommendations, of course I recommend the first two films. The second one has its peaks, but it's not the greatest of films, but it's the first one that I definitely think is a better film, as we're obviously being introduced to Venom, but it's Tom Hardy's performance once Venom is inside him which really encapsulates it. I think he did an amazing performance, being this schizophrenic, paranoid character being controlled or mind controlled by some creature. I think that performance alone is something to rewatch. But if you're like me and you really enjoy Venom, I definitely recommend cartoons. That's the best place to go for it, especially the Amazing Spider-Man and Spectacular Spider-Man. Now, when they interact with Peter Parker, I felt like both shows went a similar narrative, but it's when they go into Eddie Brock is where it differs. I definitely think those are worth watching if you are a Venom fan. And my last recommendation is Spawn, the animated series. I recommend Spawn because Todd McFarlane made both Spawn and Venom, and there's a lot of similarities that we see through the TV series and in the movies. Venom is a killer, as is Spawn, but they also are doing their best to protect the innocent around them in different ways, so to speak. Those are my recommendations. This has been my review for Venom 3: The Last Dance. Thank you for watching. If you have enjoyed, please like and subscribe, but most importantly, thank you and have a nice day.